in terms of the changes that are happening in the ecosystem today, right? And then I want to dedicate some time or whatever time that's left for questions that the audience would have. To begin with, for my corporate journey, I've done an engineering, worked as a coder. I worked on customization. I did a little bit of here and there in terms of my engineering career, and then switched to doing an MBA in marketing. Out of college, I joined in digital marketing and understood the ecosystem of how technical products are marketed, built, measured, in terms of how's the data flowing, and a lot of things that comes with digital marketing as a space. Luckily, I was in a company that was very, I would say, forefront in terms of what they did in digital marketing back then. And from there, I moved into a little bit of product marketing, and my introduction to product management started with that stint of mine, and specifically in the domain of travel, to understand how do PMs think, what do they look at as major problems, how do they approach problems, and what are the kind of ecosystem that they have or the tools that they use. That was my introduction to PM. After which I've worked in various other industries, starting from moving from travel into parking, then into productivity and office software, into privacy, and then now moving into creativity and tools for video, audio creatives. So that's been my career pre and post the MBA, including the product management space. After which I'm now going to move to how introduction to, okay, I can't move my slides first. Okay, now moving to introduction to product management, I think most of us here are aware that a PM does a lot more than just defining what a feature set or a product looks like. They are sort of shepherds, to say, taking a bunch of folk towards a particular destination. And those paths do change depending on what's happening, what are the business goals, and so on and so forth. So they're basically drivers who look at not just strategy, but also execution of the product. And depending on what hat you're wearing, which we'll touch upon later in the slide, what kind of role you are in the PM scope, you would be focusing on primarily on execution initially, or move to vision and strategy later. It depends on which company you are in, what phase of the product that it is in, and also depends on where you are in your careers. But basically what you do is you're looking from end to end, beginning from vision to actually making that vision a reality, right? What are the types of PM roles, right? I've done, thankfully, all three of them, and I think for me it was just happened. I didn't really plan for it, but it gives you like a flavor of what PM roles are. So I worked in B2B space, B2C space, sorry, and also built certain internal tools and platforms that are required primarily for business decision making, or primarily came out of laws that changed in the geographies that we were operating, and hence we had to quickly build certain internal tools and platforms to handle those. Each of these there's not a lot of difference in how you handle problems in these spaces, but they do have different flavors on who's your more important stakeholder, what do you actually measure for success. So there are certain flavors that change. I would say that it kind of gives you a holistic perspective when you do all three things of them, but majorly the core of what PM does is common. It's the flavoring above that core that these three areas are where different types of PMs think and do. And obviously there's a different angle to it, which I'll speak here in this particular slide, is where does the PM fit, right? And this is a very broader vision of how a team would look. The bigger the team, the bigger the organization, you will come across the specialists and the professionals helping you in different ways. But the core team generally is a product person whose counterpart is an engineering manager. And then you have a designer who's then working with data scientists and engineers, right? Now you could have technical product managers who might be working much closely with the engineering manager and not have a design counterpart. That depends on what kind of product you're building. But generally, this is the core team. And if you are in an organization that's much bigger or has a lot more in terms of complexity, then you'll have people who'll come in to help you with, as I mentioned earlier, things like privacy. You'll have to have legal clearances, change of policies and law which impact your product, and you'll have all of those professionals who can come in and help you. And then there's obviously specialists that you go depending on where you're in the product development cycle. You will reach out to specialists, whether that's a user research at the beginning or a product marketing person when you're either building the strategy or you build the product and then you want to release it, right? So that's how very broadly this team would sit in. I'm not saying that every team will have a similar context, but majority of the people that you would interact with would be these set of folks. The product manager becomes like a focal point for these discussions. Not always will the product person drive these conversations, but you are taking inputs from these multiple stakeholders or people who are giving you these inputs, and you become like a sort of connecting wire, if to say, between all of these groups, right? So how do you get into product management? And as I mentioned, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. My focus is more on skills, not so on the interview process. But so what would those skills be, right? And a lot of people do say that you need empathy and curiosity, and the other things that I mentioned on this particular slide. And I think why I have structured this particular conversation today is to focus on skills that are required for you to kickstart the career. And then we'll dig deeper into those specific skills much later in the PPT. But this is a primer, because my next slide will talk about the interview skills and how those skills are measured in an interview, right? And what do people mean by empathy and curiosity is, can you put yourself in the place of a person who's facing the problem that you're trying to solve, and are you curious enough to understand what they're solving for? On the other hand, you need a little bit of analytical sense to say, if I see the data that's presented, can I make sense of it? And more importantly, if I don't have data, can I still make sense of different signals that are given to me, and make a conclusion or have a point of view on what that problem state would mean? And obviously, when you have all of this presented to you on a platter, can you make structure decision out of all of these data points? And how well can you then communicate that problem statement, the solution that you've come up to, and how you plan to solve for it? It goes without saying that if you're not able to influentially communicate, or you're not able to influence people with your communication style, it's slightly difficult for things to be for the ball to start rolling, right? So it's important that you have these skills. Depending on where you're in your career, some of these skills are more important than the others. And how you start your career also starts with certain skills which we call the core or the essentials of being a PM, and then there are layers above it which we'll touch upon, right? But why did I bring this slide up here? Because next I want to talk about the PM interview itself. We can only talk about the career once you've actually made a jump into PM, right? Most of you would have come across content that really helps people solve for interviews, so I'm not going to really spend a lot of time here. But the things that people are looking for are generally, if you are in an interview that is being that's open for a position that has a specific ask and a requirement, highly likely that the questions that you receive would be about that specific area and problems that team is facing. But many a times hiring doesn't really happen like that. So you would be given a very broad question, and they're just looking at how you're looking at the question, right? And there is tons of content on what the problem solving skills that are needed, what kind of analytical questions that come. And most of these would be questions that also are asked in the consulting world, just to see how you think, because what they're looking for is, can you then be in a particular domain and learn how that domain works and become a PM for that specific area and the problems that they are facing. The biggest and the most important here for me is the cultural fit. Every team has its own way of working, and sometimes people are just looking to see if you can be a part of that mold that they have, or you can bring fresh perspective to that fold. But it's very subjective, so very hard to sort of gauge how people will judge this. Many a times we look at PM interviews as an interview for us to join the organization, but I would like to urge you to think of what are the kind of problems that people asked you while you were interviewing for them. You will also get a kind of a vague analysis or a way to gauge what kind of people are you going to work with, or what kind of people they sent to represent a company, especially if you have multiple rounds that these days we have. I've seen interviews that are like 5 or 6 rounds, so you can see what kind of people are coming and what kind of questions they ask depending on the background of that particular person's area of expertise, right? So you kind of have to also gauge what kind of questions they ask. So if you are, as I mentioned, if the opening for that PM role is very specific, then you know what kind of work you're going to do if the questions are very specific to their problem statement. And you can obviously ask, is this a current problem that you're facing? So you also can gauge what kind of work you would do in that specific role, right? But now, because we're here in the PM school, you do care about what is the person who's interviewing looking at, right? This is very subjective again. And all of this, the data that I'm sharing is publicly available. There's nothing that's secret sauce here, but they're just looking at beyond what you've actually done so far. They're also looking at how much have you actually thought of the space that this particular opening is in. So basically, if XYZ company is coming and you're interviewing for them, have you genuinely thought about that space? What have you researched, or what have you understood of the area to bring in some unique sites? And you're able to ask questions that that shows that you've actually spent some time in thinking about the space in itself. So that gives people a sense of how interested you are, how you think, and how much you have thought about the problem statements itself, right? And then, as I mentioned, there is obviously the fit part, which a lot of founders and CEOs or execs hiring for their team do look into. Here, I would like to also urge you to think of this as it's again a two-way thing. You also are looking at what kind of questions people asked you. And when you ask for genuine and high quality questions, which is the point 2 here, and if those questions are pertaining to that specific role, and if that role was having a requirement that is fixed, then they will also try and understand how much you were able to understand that space in that given time, right? So moving on from interviews, I want to go into career and spend a little more time here. PM career, and I've here specifically said what does it entail, right? Because a career could mean different things for different people. Some people look at a career as a ladder. Some people look at it as more as a matrix, and they do take up challenges or openings as and when they're interested in certain spaces, or it's an upcoming new technology and they're interested. So not always is a career seen in terms of a ladder. But what it generally entails is when you start a career in a specific space, and this is not really sandboxed just to PM career, right? Any career that you start, you are first focusing on building competence in that space, or competence as that designation. So if you're a product manager, you're building competence to be a good product manager. From there, the career can go to, I've built the skills that I need, or I am a decent enough product manager. Now I want to work for the right companies or the right problem statements that these companies can stand for. So that could be a second stage in your PM career. And from there, it could also go to, I want to get recognized and hired and promoted by the companies or by the people that I want to work for. It doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3. It could all be, obviously 1 has to be there, but 2 and 3 can go hand in hand, or they could come, 3 could come before 2, depends on if you are already working in a career, in a company that you think is the right problem space that you are in, or you're excited about the problem and now you want to be recognized, hired, and promoted, right? For me, why I want to work and build competence, I feel like there's a lot of conversation around cracking PM career, a lot of conversation how to catapult your career, but I at least when I was starting out, I felt like there was not a lot of conversation on how do you actually start your career? What does becoming a PM or an assistant PM for the first time mean? And anecdotally here, I joined a company as the only PM in a company that was a small startup, didn't have a lot of documentation. It was all verbal. A complicated product was built, a very good product was built, but with not a lot of processes in place. And when you get into a career, first job of that particular career, and you don't have a lot of structure and processes, it's kind of difficult to also figure out your way through that through that role. And through those hardships, I feel like we should focus on building that competence. And when you're building that competence, it doesn't really necessarily have to be your first stint. It can be a couple of stints depending on how long you spend in those stints, and also depends on what kind of switches you have made. So you could go from a domain that is a completely technical to completely creative, and it could mean that you have to build a new set of competencies, or the technology completely changes and it's a 10x technology that comes in that you have to build in competence again. So it doesn't have to be it's always going to be 1 2 3. It could happen at any stage. And as I mentioned, I don't look at it as a career, and more so as a matrix moving across different domains. I specifically like switching between domains. So I have gone from parking all the way to creativity. So for me, this 1 2 3 does apply in each stint of mine. Anyhow, let's go to what build competence means in a PM world, and then look at it in specific to one stint or one role that you're in. So this is a PM career skills map. You'll easily find this online. It's a available resource. If you look at the bottom section of this page, it's basically talking about the core and essential PM skills that I mentioned earlier. So the analytical sense, product sense, and execution sense, that becomes the core layer, above which comes a little bit of technical know-how and a design sense, which then has the plethora of skills that people have depending on what kind of organization they are or where they are in terms of the career path. You may have to have certain other sort of skills, which could then mean you are moving from an IC role to maybe a manager role, and you need to be able to mentor and build a PM org. Or you could then go to a layer above where you're actually in completely running the org, and you have to do organizational design or do company level scale execution, right? But the fundamentals don't change. So your analytical, product sense, and execution sense are the core of a PM's essential skill set, which obviously does not go without saying that you need, which you see the two parallel pillars here, which is influential communication and critical thinking, go hand in hand, irrespective of where you are in any career, in any stage. Those two are the fundamental pillars anyway. So let's just dig a little deeper in what analytical, product sense, and execution sense mean, and what do those further entail, right? And whatever I'm saying today is not anything new. If you are following some influential PMs on social media, you will hear them speak about these. And a lot of those, the pointers that they have mentioned are here adapted in this particular skill, particular PPT. So what does execution sense mean, right? And I'm going to spend a little more time here. If you are a PM that's starting your career, for you, execution sense could all just mean project management, right? You may have a counterpart who does project management for you sometimes, if your org is built that way. Many a times, the PM and the engineering manager do a lot of the project management work. So it depends in terms of how much of that work you're doing as a PM. But irrespective, you will have to do some amount of project management, because you're trying to figure out when does the design delivery come in for this feature or the spec that you're writing, in terms of resourcing, where does it go, how much time will we need, and all of those specific questions, whether you're building a single feature or building an entire workflow or building a product, you will have to do some amount of project management at any stage of your given career. It starts with the essential of that execution sense. So you have to be able to say, be able to understand and interpret what people mean when they say this will take so much time, and or this is complex or has a different t-shirt sizing and stuff, those terms that are used in terms of developmental hours, right? Also, it could mean problem solving. So you do know what you're solving for in terms of your users ask, but you have to also solve for problems that are very much related to your inter-org dependencies, where someone would come and say, oh, this resource is not here. Depends on where you are in what kind of org that is. If there are other people who are solving resourcing for you, then great, you don't have to deal with questions like that. But you could get problems like, we need X feature to be ready or X API to be ready to solve for Y front end feature, right? And things like that that come in it comes with the job. So you need to be able to understand those problems, if not solve for them, at least be able to bring the right stakeholders in the room and try and take that conversation to a place where you feel like a conclusion might arrive, or you might reach to a solution that's acceptable in terms of the delivery, in terms of the challenges or the constraints that you have in terms of that particular setup. Organization navigation, not so much in a smaller company. I feel if you're in a flatter organization, it's easier to navigate. You would know who does what. It's easier to get introductions and kind of understand who's responsible for what role. But the bigger an org, and if you're starting with a bigger organization, it's a little difficult to understand or navigate the complexities that come with a bigger group, or dependencies that could arrive on a random group building something else that becomes like a tech layer for you. So being able to understand and navigate through that, which I sometimes believe it's a little complicated to start with, because you have to not only understand what you need from that group, you also have to be able to understand what their constraints are and how they could solve that problem for you and bring that group, sometimes not directly under your business vertical, but to be able to bring them on the same page and say, this is important for us for whatever reasons, and bring stakeholders that could be above your pay grade, who could influence you to bring, who could influence you and the group that you're trying to influence, in saying, how do we solve for problems that are dependencies on different organizations, right? The next two, the analytical sense, I feel, though not easy, a skill set that's comparatively much more, for a lack of better word, easier to learn. And why do I say that? There's very little subjectiveness that comes with data, right? So when you start looking at data, I think the bigger learning curve is to learn a data tool. You could go from one company to another, which has completely different data tools. So figuring out what that data means, how it's being tracked, would probably be a learning curve. But once you get a hang of the data tool, I think it becomes easier once you've understood what metrics that business has or measures. Pattern recognition also with time becomes easy, because you are getting the same sort of inputs in terms of either anecdotal data or very hard numbers, and you tend to look at pattern recognition two or three cycles in a particular business. You kind of learn how that goes, and if you have an area that you're completely focused on, then it's easier to pick pattern recognition. And goes without saying that if you're a person who understands data and pattern, you'll also have a sort of logic that you build around saying, this is what I saw last time, so I think this might be the reason. And from that pattern will come a logic where you're preemptively also knowing that this could impact, what could that impact on in the downturn, downstream, what would that data mean in terms of its impact on the downstream features that are being built, right? But the most important, and the one that I feel is hard to learn, is product sense. Not so about empathy, domain knowledge, and creativity, but also, in my view, it's my personal view, that what happens to a PM, especially in the beginning of their career, is you get multiple stakeholders coming and telling you different data points. And to be able to look at all of that and then know what is not important or what is noise, while you keep aside your recency bias, your confirmation bias, And the sheer designation of the person who's telling you that particular data is, I think, a hard skill to learn, and that takes time. You might understand the domain, you might be on top of what are the products that are coming in that domain. You were, all of that is important. I'm not dismissing it. Knowing what people are building in that domain helps you keep updated, and you can bring those ideas to your decision making. But in the sea of information that you have, which might come from just your curiosity and you learning a lot, your users giving you feedback. So let me give you an example, right? Suppose you go to a 3 o'clock user session, and this specific user tells you, this is my main problem, these not so much. If you solve this for me, I'll be happy. And then you go to a decision making meeting at 5. Now that recency bias kind of creeps in, and it happens to everyone, right? Had that meeting not happened, probably your point of view would be slightly different. It also happens when, suppose you're reporting to the CEO or somebody who is a higher exec, and they come with an anecdotal data, or your sales executives will come and say, this is the most important customer I have, and they have this challenge and we need to solve it, are the issues that I think PMs struggle with. At least I have struggled in the past, where I might not believe that that's right for the product, or I don't think all users have that problem. But depending on which stakeholder is telling me, or how recently I've heard of these problems, they could influence the decision making going in a specific direction, right? If there are simple features, I think you own the end-to-end decision making, so the onus is more so on you. When you are a piece in a bigger jigsaw puzzle, then you have a little more time to sort of look back and think of how that piece fits in the entire puzzle. So for me, the product sense basically is not only about, do I understand the problem that I'm trying to solve and how this problem affects the people or the systems that I'm building this for. It's beyond, as I mentioned, if you are somebody who likes changing careers from A domain to B domain and then jump completely to a random domain, it goes without saying that you have to first start with understanding the domain. So you will do those things. And then creativity is basically about, I kind of want to take a pause on creativity. A lot of PMs initially, when they're starting the career, I did this mistake. I thought all solutions need to come from me, which I don't think is a fair statement to say. The PM can, after looking at a bunch of solutions, be able to say, or looking at N options, be able to give a better idea of what makes sense, because they have built that product sense of having to take N number of information and then drill it down or filter it to precisely that decision-making criteria, which can change. It changes every time. But they can then say the creativity is applied in that logical transformation. But not all ideas need to come from PMs. And initially, when I started my career, I used to always feel like, oh, I didn't think of this. But that's not my job. My job is not to think of ideas. Sometimes the best ideas come from your counterparts in engineering and design, because they're looking at the problem from a very different perspective, and working with them as in terms of partnership actually builds better creative solutions than individually PM thinking of problem statements, right? Creativity also comes not just with beautiful products, it also comes with very complicated technological products, and sometimes that gets dismissed. For example, if a law changes on privacy and you need to build something very quickly for a complicated workflow that gets impacted, not just in your product, but multiple products, because you're building a common technology that other sister teams would use. Now, your creativity is, how do you solve for a problem that's not just your product's problem, but impacts everybody, because you're building a plug and play model of a product or of a feature that others will use, right? So your creativity then is, I bring the right stakeholders, I bring all the problem statements at one point, and then I say, within the constraints that I have with respect to resourcing and time, what's the best solution that I can give that is acceptable by legal, or your legal team will sign off on, right? So creativity could all mean all of this. But I'd urge you to think of product sense as the core feature that gets developed only with time, and there's no secret. It's not like a magic wand that you can just learn. But it's a skill that I think takes time, and especially in your first 1 or 2 stints is where you have to focus on understanding, am I really taking the decision because I'm understanding everything and I make sense of the problem, or is it just this particular problem is something that I have faced, and or this person has told me they face, and that's why I want to solve for it. I think I've spent too much time on this, but I did want to. If you are starting as a PM, these are the 3 things that I think you need to work on. But the next slide, which I think is also equally important, is communication, and this will depend on your company and the way they communicate. So if you're in a startup, highly likely that they don't expect a full length spec, a complicated or a fully thought out, fleshed out spec. They would probably need a 1-pager. Sometimes it could just mean a decision is made, and how would you communicate that decision? Is it just through a Slack on a forum that most of your stakeholders are? Do you have to go into a meeting, or do you have to write an email? It depends, right? So you have to focus. And if you're starting out, don't have to learn everything, right? If your company focuses more on verbal communication, that would be the case if it's a smaller org. You then have to figure out, how do I communicate without being extremely verbose, come to the main point of the conversation, and keep in mind who is the audience, what is it I want to get out of that audience, what's the objective of that specific meeting. If it's verbal, it's probably going to be a group of people gathered together or on a call. And then you have to look at that message in terms of the audience lens. More so important for a PM, because you'll go to a design conversation, you can't really talk complicated tech to a designer. Not that they wouldn't understand, but that's not the focus of your conversation. Vice versa, you go to tech, they will understand design much better than you maybe, but that cannot be the focus of your conversation. Similarly, you can't go to sales and say, these are my tech challenges and why I can't implement it. So depending on who's your audience, what you want from that specific meeting, and what's the mode of your conversation, you need to kind of prepare. If you're lucky, you're in an org where you might have presentations that you do to board members, hopefully, or you're going to the CTO of a big tech who's is a potential client. You may have to present certain ideas on behalf of the org, or you are accompanying an exec who might have certain specific questions that you might be pulled in for answering. So you have to prepare and probably over prepare for those moments. Even if they're not those moments, even if it's not just for a big important meeting, your stand-ups sometimes are places where you are understanding the product and how these processes are built at the initial stage of your career. So to be able to grasp what they're saying sometimes, so you'll have to go later and go to an engineer and say, hey, I did not understand, and be open to that conversation and be able to understand. But this specific slide, I wanted to focus on it in terms of a skill set, is where you are driving the conversation and you are responsible for certain decisions that would be made, or you have to bring everyone on the same page, or you are trying to, you have a goal post and you're trying to bring all stakeholders in a particular direction. If it's a written communication, which could be in a case of a bigger org, there'll be no dearth of senior PMs in your organization who would have written fantastic specs. I have learned a lot of spec writing from people who were in the orgs that I joined in, and I was always taken aback. I was like, oh, they thought of this, and they also thought about this, and it used to make me feel very. I would be very impressed. At the same time, I would wonder, why didn't I think of it? But it's a skill, especially written skill. And each company has its own way of also looking at written documents. Some people have a specific structure. Some people keep it very open-ended. Some people collaborate on documentation where you have to keep AI always on what are the comments that are coming in, or they would Slack you about certain documents. So you have to kind of adjust it depending on your organization. But I cannot emphasize more about how it's, if not the most, but a very important skill for a PM to learn develop and keep brushing on. I'm known to not prepare for my meetings, so I would say that it's something that I'm learning too. I generally like going without a lot of preparation, but for big moments also, yes, we kind of try to prepare and over prepare too. Let me go to the next one. Yeah, how do you grow, right? Obviously, there are a lot of things in how you're measured as like your career measurement could happen on across different metrics depending on your org, right? Each organization either has values and systems across which they are measuring you, but it's broadly categorized in, are you able to execute what you were supposed to, or what you started to plan, and whatever your end goal was? How was that execution process? It's not about how smooth or how many features you put out. Obviously, it depends again on your org, but it's more so how were you able to bring all your stakeholders in the execution path and solve for problems that come from that organizational matrix or from sheer project management, right? That comes from the execution part of it. Impact. Impact is hard to measure if your features are not specifically built directly with business goals, right? For example, when I mentioned a law changes, it might not bring in more revenue, but its immediate impact is measured with how quickly was the company being able to understand the law, its impact on technology, plan for a feature, and then build it out too, right? That's an impact. That's an impact that you cannot deny, though it doesn't really have a metric that you can measure. But these are subjective, and they're also in hand with what your conversations about your growth in career mean with your manager and your skip level managers. But generally, impact is measured with metrics and problems that were critical in terms of the business running smooth, right? The third and not so spoken about, but unfortunately exists, is optics. We cannot deny that optics play a part in how we are seen as product managers, or as any career for that matter, and how you're perceived to be an effective or a not effective PM. So optics do play a part, but in the course of long careers, I feel like optics does come back to the first point of competence. You can only put optics till a particular point. Just excuse me 1 second. Yeah, so don't get bogged down by optics. Optics could also mean you're prepared for a meeting, right? So suppose you have a weekly meetings where you discuss about the shipping of your product, and you're ready with your user feedback for the previous week, or the challenges that your team is facing the previous weeks, also mean optics. Being prepared is a form of optics, but crudely it means your perception of how good PM you are in the eyes of your engineers, your designers, your engineering manager, and basically your immediate circle of people that you work with, and then obviously execs and decision makers, if they are in the pathway you have these meetings, or you have exposure to those conversations. Recognition also happens in different ways. Not always recognition comes in terms of in terms of promotions, or in terms of monetary benefits. It could also mean that you just are known to solve good problems, and so they will give you problems that you have not solved in the past, but they believe that you're ready to solve, or they think that you'll do justice to the problem statement, or you have certain skill sets. And not everybody can solve all problems, right? There are certain skill sets that you have which you could then enhance, and that could be a learning opportunity. Or it could be a conversation where you have with somebody like your manager, and say, hey, I want to build this, and that's a learning opportunity they bring to you, saying that that's a weakness and let's make sure you grow. So those are also ways how you grow in a career. Again, this I'm not looking at in terms of a ladder. It's more so how are you recognized? So you're recognized when people give you complicated problems. You're recognized when they give you learning opportunities. Ratings is a black and white mostly, so there's nothing to speak about here. And then there are obviously promotions, or you could change teams, or somebody from another team asks you to be a part of their group if they find you to be good at your craft. And then obviously compensation goes with recognition, right? The better you are at your competence, the better compensated you are. I am not going to talk about this in terms of a ladder. It's basically how you are progressing from a PM who has just started his career and becoming a good PM versus a PM who is an assistant PM who becomes like a CPO. That's not how I look at career. Obviously, it's very subjective. Some people choose to remain ICs because that's their skill set, or they want to navigate their career in that way. So it's not specific to do with designations, and that's why promotions don't really mean designations here. It basically means more responsibility and more compensation, or more wider scope of influence with the products that you build, right? And this is a slide I directly took from Shreyas. Actually, Shreyas is one of these PMs who has really good content on Twitter, or his individual series talks and show podcasts that he does. So this is a way of looking at career product leaders, right? That's what I meant. It's not specifically a ladder. You could be good at somebody who can think out of the box visionary ideas, or you're somebody who generally is very good at execution and can pull a 50 to 100 people team to build the right set of products that brings in the right impact. Or you could be somebody who just is very, very good at strategy, who knows how to, quickly change course and can finesse a PM team to build fantastic products. So even product leaders don't really have specific molds. So it's good to work on your strengths, and more so try different careers and try different domains till you get a hang of what you like, what you're good at, and then build your leadership or your career journey accordingly. Yeah, that's about it. There are some resources, as I mentioned. There are books specific for cracking the PM interview, books on how people build products. Not all of them would be applicable to the space that you're in, and also with changing technology, not a lot of material that exists before makes sense in the current space. For example, Hooked, the book, the author wrote Hooked to create products that are addictive. Whereas now there is a complete different point of view on thinking of addiction of technology products. So it doesn't really make sense in this day and age, but being kind of well versed with what those products did and how technology has evolved is a good space to be. Shreyas, as I mentioned, is one of the active PMs, great guys, has great frameworks to follow. One more guy is Lenny, who has great podcasts. He calls different stakeholders, different PMs, and you can learn a lot from those conversations. And obviously, there's a lot of social media activity now in PM space. A lot of people are interested in this as a career. But I would say it's a lot more about having fun. Getting to solve the right problems, I think, is also it's a crucial point. Nonetheless, it's a journey that I think all of us are on, and I wish you all of you good luck. Hey, Priyal. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pooja, for the wonderful session, right? Extremely insightful, right? And we have been getting a lot of queries while you were speaking, right? A few of them have written on LinkedIn, a few of them have shared here on Slack as well, and on Slack, and a few of them have written here on chat as well. Yeah. So a couple of questions which we got on LinkedIn. So question from Arnav: do PM sometimes need to do operations level work as well? Right? You were talking about project management as a skill set of for product manager, right?
Yeah, so it's very specific to your org. It depends on how big your team is, what you are trying to solve. If you go for a startup, there's no doubt that you will have to do a lot of operations, right? You literally have
Absolutely.
you will have to be like the person who decides when design picks. If you have 4 features to build and you're or maybe there are 2 PMs building 4 features, between the two of you, you will have to decide which goes first, right? Because you have limited resources. So you have to do a lot of operations. But operations could also mean a lot of different things, right? It could mean that you are a person who is following up. Like you say, you have a design manager and you tell him, like, look, these are my priorities. And the design manager will come back and tell you. Or you could have an user research guy whom you go along with to say, hey, I want some insights. They're driving it for you, but you are a part of that. So if that is what you mean by operations, because operations means everything in the scope is operations.
Absolutely.
So PMs don't really just say, this is the problem, this is the solution, go do it, right? That's not how it works. It's a lot about partnership. It's a lot about getting your hands dirty, especially when you're starting out in your career. And that's a good thing to do, because those 3 senses that we were talking about developing only happens when you are in the thick of it.
Absolutely. So I'll just add on to what you said, right? So a lot of PM school grads, when they join a first PM role, after a month, they come back to me and say, Ankit, yaar, ye to bahut different hai. This is not exactly product management, so to say. I'm doing a lot of project work, right? And that's when I, share them what Shreyas usually share, right? As a PM, you need to have a very high agency, right? Essentially getting things done, right? And that's a knack. You can call it operational skill set, you can call it project management skill set, but there would be people who are not only good at product sense or creativity or analytics, but they're also good at getting things done. So you have to get things done, whatever it takes to get the things done. As a product manager, you will be required to do it. Unfortunately, fortunately, that's how the role is, right? And like the best is to accept it and move on with it, right?
I would urge you to think about, whoever asked this question, I would urge you to think of it as a necessary skill.
Correct.
If you're secluded from the ops work, you are then thinking in a silo, in a box.
Yeah.
And somebody messaged here while you were speaking, does it impact my portfolio? I think it only does good. If you're able to say, I was able to execute and release a feature, that adds more value to your, I don't know what portfolio as a PM means, but it basically means it adds to your ability to be able to take a problem statement and bring it to fruition. So that's great. If you have some, you should aspire.
Absolutely. So Arnav, operational excellence is one skill set which is slightly understated in a PM's world, because we talk a lot about, product sense or, creativity, but operational excellence is what gets things done, what gets, things rolling. If you are executing, nothing like it, right? You might be, at least in the starting phase, you might not be that great at maybe product sense because you're still imbibing or you're still inculcating that sense. But if you get good at getting things done, nothing like it, man.
Yeah. Just to add, when I joined Microsoft, I specifically told this to my manager and my colleagues, saying, I only want to do execution for the first.
Absolutely. Correct.
Because I was coming from a background where that didn't happen. And I felt like I had lost in touch with what's happening in the execution space. I said, I don't want to do anything that's not going live in the next 6 months.
Absolutely. And Arnav, if you're looking to build your portfolio, right, create a narrative around it, that why you should become a PM with your ops experience, that you'll come out very strong. I come from an operations manager to a PM background, right? So operations was my skill set. I didn't see other PMs, getting their hands dirty as much as I could. And that really helped me in the initial days of being a product manager, right? There's one question which I got on Slack from one of our community members, Pooja. What happens with, in India, a lot of people are just enamored by B2C product management role. That, I want to be a B2C at a food tech company or a fintech or and go and all that, right? Yeah. But there are some people who are really aware, very few people, unfortunately, who are aware about, some companies doing really good B2B, making really good B2B products as well. So what are the places where, they could find, like, what are the upcoming B2B startups and what are the jobs, like what are the APM roles where they can look up, right? Okay, let's say this is a B2B company which is, hiring.
Yeah. So
I'll just, sorry to interrupt. I'll just, add, because you don't see a lot of evangelism around B2B products, right?
Yeah. It's fancy to build a B2C product because it's spoken of. But I think most big companies that I have worked for build both. So they build for individual customer and they build for B2B. So that could be a good mix if you are not sure of getting into a B2B career, right? Because it feels like, oh, B2B is a lot of not so much fun work. But the problem statements are very interesting in B2B space too, right? Like, let me take the AI world. The AI world, the space that's developing has so much scope for B2B, which they can solve much more easily than B2C, because B2C comes with an n number of laws that you are restricted with, where the B2B guy will not say, I have a problem, because you are solving the problem for his specific need, right? So looking at B2B as a second-hand candidate, I wouldn't look at it that way. In fact, I have built internal tools and dashboards that I knew probably didn't even make a lot of difference to the revenue, but was very necessary for our teams to smoothly function and work.
Correct.
So no particular space or no particular PM role is better than the other. Each of these comes with just you wearing a different cap because your customer problem is different. B2C, I think starting from B2B is better, because then you can get very pointed feedback from your customers when you're starting out, right? When you're looking at B2C, where you have like millions of users, only data is the only way you can actually concrete, which can give you like the truth. Otherwise, it's all going to be anecdotal data. But B2B, on the other hand, they will give you very specific questions. So sorry, I missed the exact point.
The question is how to find out what are the good upcoming B2B startups.
Yeah. So all SaaS-based products, if you like a specific SaaS product, there will be a version of that product exist on different scales. So let's take Slack for an example, because I'm not able to remember anything right now. Slack as a product exists as a B2B and a B2C product, but specifically as a B2B product, right? Now, not necessarily that you would want to apply for Slack, but in that area of messaging platforms or communication platforms, you will get B2B companies that are solving the same problem for a set of customer that doesn't want the feature set of Slack or can't pay as much as Slack.
Can't pay.
So the SaaS products, if you like certain products and you want to work in that space, there's a huge chance that there'll be a company in that space solving the same problem either better or for a different customer segment, like a smaller, medium-scaled customer segment. And that is where you can start looking for. You can obviously apply for all B2B companies, but not necessarily that it's easier to crack these companies because their scale is big or they're not primarily always in India, so they might not have those many requirements.
So a good reference for these companies would be check these, you can check competitors of Slack, or, check similar industry on Zoom Info or on, website like Apollo, wherein you will get, details of these companies. And then you can obviously reach out to the product heads on LinkedIn. We'll take questions from our Zoom, people who are active on Zoom. So, Kothandaram, I'll just ask you to unmute and feel free to ask a question. And then, Hiba, you can ask the question after Kothandaram. Please.
Hi, good evening. First of all, thank you for arranging this session. So my question is, the PM role in manufacturing industry and the IT industry are similar, or is there any different? So what are the skill set we need to develop for the manufacturing sectors for the PM and also for the IT? So I'm having this doubt.
Okay. So I'm not coming from a manufacturing background, but I did work in the parking industry where we were building these IoT systems, right? The ground, Kushal would be probably able to speak more about it today, but we were building the basic hardware that's needed in the parking, which would work with our digital products, right? So that's the scope of what I know in terms of manufacturing. Obviously, there are other manufacturing, there are a ton number of manufacturing PM jobs there, which I don't have the insight into answer, but I will answer for specifically the experience that I have, which is a crossover between hardware and software. So when you're building a product that needs that kind of layover, you kind of need to know a little bit about the software, but more so about the hardware. And if you're a software PM who's using that hardware, you kind of need to know a little bit about what goes into the system and what comes out of the system. You can treat it as a black box. But in terms of what your skill set is, I don't think it's different, right? You again have a problem statement, you're solving it for somebody, and those three senses that you're developing are for any problem statement, whether it's in a manufacturing space or a software space. But as I mentioned, I don't have experience to kind of completely justify your question. So I will just, with my limited understanding, say that it shouldn't really vary how you approach problems when you're solving, especially if you are the person who's driving their entire problem space.
Correct. I think in manufacturing, at least in tech, you might have to, obviously your stakeholders would definitely be different. That's, I think, one major difference which I see. And I'm not sure, like as Pooja also said, what is actually a PM's role in manufacturing, right? Because I know that in at least in FMCG, a lot of what PMs do relates to pricing or packaging of a product, right? And conducting user surveys, etc. And that is slightly similar to what a PM does in a tech, but a PM in a tech ecosystem is much more than maybe a PM in a FMCG, right?
Yeah. So that depends on your domain, right?
Correct.
So
That depends on your domain. Yeah.
Banking system, I know PMs in banking system whose problems are completely different, but the approach doesn't change.
Yeah. There's one question. Okay, I'll ask Hiba. Hiba, can you unmute and ask your question?
Hi. Thank you so much, Priya, for the session that you just gave. I hope I'm audible right now.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is that it's a more personal question, if that's okay. So
sure.
I'm currently in a more technical, like sales analytics role, right? And I was really hoping to make a pivot to a product role. And I just wanted to know, perhaps get advice even, how you could make that shift from a more technical role to something like product.
So you said you are from analytics and sales background?
Yeah, yes.
And you're looking to move into product of a similar space?
Actually, no, because I'm currently working in an FMCG.
Okay.
And hoping to shift into a more tech-related role, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that.
Yeah. So the skill set that you need for pivoting is not really coming from your background. So you could be like a mathematics major or a psychology student or an MBA grad who can move into products, right? Because when you're interviewing, they're not really looking at which space you're working in, but how do you approach problems? And so assuming, Hiba, you're coming from an analytical background, you kind of understand this better than any one of us here, is to how do you look at data and how do you crunch data to bring insight to a problem, right? So if you can bring that skill set to a PM job, that'll be great. So you would ideally want to look at entry-level PM roles that are data heavy. If that's what you do, if you crunch data and you're very good with numbers and you kind of know certain tools and you know how to read data and look at data in terms of a learned data scientist kind of a role, then you can easily get into roles that are those. And every sort of a big org PM will have data specialists. Whether that data specialist is an engineer who writes SQLs or he's a data product person, irrespective, there will be these roles. And more so, those roles are being being more and more opened up because the challenges of understanding data is not straightforward, especially if the org is big. And the more and more now we are getting complicated with the kind of data that we can capture and how do we measure. Your background actually suits to that kind of role. So suppose if I was coming out of an MBA with just a degree with no learned experience of how looking data, you are actually in a better position to say, I understand this, or we're able to look at, and FMCG has a lot of data crunching. So also, there are PM roles that do only data crunching in terms of revenue projections, pricing, looking at live data and saying what should be our cost. Or for like an example, Zomato, right? They run these live offers and discounts. All of that is primarily looking at transaction data and coming up with really great deals. Things like that are areas that Hiba would be spaces that you should look into. But I think you would be in a better position than most of us in terms of getting that data kind of a role.
Absolutely. So, Hiba, I'm not very sure because I haven't seen your LinkedIn profile, but you can definitely try for product analyst roles at early stage companies, right? Because you have an analytics background, try for product analyst roles. These product analysts, they work along with PMs and senior PMs and help them with the insights, and then you can move up the ladder, right? From a product analyst, you could become an APM2, then a PM1, PM2, as Pooja said. So that would be a good path for you, right? The idea is not to change too many deltas here. One delta is that you take the same role, product analyst role, in a early stage startup instead of directly jumping to maybe a PM role in a domain which is probably not yours, right? All right. There's one question from Shreyans. Pooja, is it okay if we take two questions?
Yeah, we can take one. Sure.
So there's one question by Shreyans. Shreyans is actually a fourth year engineering student, and he's asking, according to you, which is better, starting a career as a PM in a startup or a big firm?
I'm biased. So I'm going to tell you what I feel is the right thing to do, but it's again very subjective. I felt that jumping into a PM career in a startup was good for me because the learning curve was very steep. It was hard, and I'm not going to say no to how hard it was because you're learning a new career. And as I mentioned, startups don't really have a lot of structure and processing. And I was the only PM in a team which was filled with engineers. So it was very, very difficult to learn the craft while you're solving real-time problems, right? But the exposure I got in terms of being able to take decisions quickly on the go, learning that product sense kind of helped me in a startup. In a big org also, you do develop that sense. It's not that it's just not there, but it's your scope of your influence is smaller because when you're entering a bigger org, they also know you're coming in that role as a fresh graduate. So they give you scope that they know you can deal with, and they'll have a lot of support system built in that they will help you with a good org structure and feedback and stuff like that. So for me, I'm not saying all startups are like they'll throw you in the water and like hope that you swim, but for me personally it helped. It was hard, but it helped. I think what I would have learned in 2-3 stints I kind of learned in one. Sometimes even if you're not in a startup and in a slightly bigger org, your org is set up in such a way that your turnaround on products is faster, right? You are a fast product, or you're a product that has to innovate, or you're in a very competitive space. There also I feel your learning curves are much higher. How I deal with that is from startups, I moved into bigger companies, but in domains that were completely not related. So it depends. If you like learning, if you like different domains, you get bored with domains. So you can do that later. Or you can start from a bigger company and slowly climb that, figure out your interest and then move in. Biased answer, I think startup. Yeah.
I would also agree. See, essentially, Shreyans, right? The proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? And as a product manager, nothing excites me more than a release, right? And you get to own more in a very early stage companies, right? And you get to, I would say, the release cycles are much smaller, so you get to, iterate very quickly. You get more exposure, I would say, to experimentation, right? And obviously you take big swings in a startup, whereas if you are in a very mature org, as Pooja also said, I'll totally second that, the domain of influence might not be as much as it would be in a very early stage. So again, totally biased because I also started off my career in a very early stage company, right? There's one question which I think is very straightforward. Arun Kumar had asked, pattern recognition is mandatory. I think he took it literally, but he's asking is, as per my knowledge, pattern recognition is related to ML. So what essentially pattern recognition would use means when it comes to, PMing?
Yeah. No, so pattern recognition means seasonality, for an example, right? You are in a company whose transaction is seasonal. So for example, you sell cars more during Diwali, right? That's a pattern recognition you do. If you spend like 1 or 2 cycles or even like 2 or 3 months and you look at data, you'll be like, oh, every quarter at this particular stage, we get a peak, or you have a lax, or you acquire more customers. It could mean anything for your business, or it could also just mean simple things like resourcing. If this is about the business, right? You're looking at certain orders and transactions and you realize, oh, this happens every year, so I can discount this and not solve for this problem. Or this has not happened last year and I know this is an anomaly, so I need to look into it more. Or it could be as simple as you are in a manager and you're looking at resourcing, and every year your company hires more graduates during internship or just post internship. That's the kind of pattern recognition I mean. I'm not talking about complicated data, ML. Those are skills that you need to prepare and learn and be specialized in. We are here talking about general PMing, which needs to look at more and more, look at data with that kind of a mindset of curiosity, and then say, oh, I think this is happening because of this, and then go down that path to see if it actually is the reasoning.
Awesome. One last question. This is also from one of our Slack community member. He is currently an APM, right? And obviously he's facing an issue. And you mentioned, how to navigate the organization. So he's asking, how do you navigate, the highest paid person's opinion if you believe you are right as a product manager?
If there was one answer for that, Ankit, right? I mean, you go ask any PM, they will say it's hard to answer. It's very context subjective. It's very dependent on how your org works, how the leadership and the culture is. Are you somebody who can then go and say, hey, I don't think this is right because of so and so? Or are you in a position that is, you are forced to take that as an important criteria in decision making? It's very, very context subjective. But if you are a person who's working in a decent org where there is openness appreciated, and you ideally should aspire to work more and more in those type of companies, you can go back with data if you have to say, I don't think this is the reasoning.
Absolutely.
Sometimes your hands will be tied. Even after you go back with data, you are forced to take certain calls, and that comes with the job, and that comes with every job. It's nothing to do specific.
Exactly. Correct. So essentially, you choose the battles which you lose, right? That's how you do. Tactically, you have to deal with it. But at least put your point forward to that person, right? That, okay, from according to the data or according to your research, this is what you think should be the solution. This is what you think we should be doing.
Yeah.
Right?
Why are you saying that? One very important thing that people do listen to is customer voice. So you have recording of a customer saying something, or you have analyzed like 100 feedback and you see like 30 are saying what you are saying, or whatever, right? It's very hard for a exec to say, no, this still doesn't make sense. And if they do have that data point where they say, no, I'm still right, then that's probably a good place to be, like saying, okay, fine, maybe you're right, and we go in that path.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm done with the questions from the Slack and from Zoom. So thank you so much, Pooja, for a wonderful session. I hope you enjoyed the questions as well, as much as you did presenting, right? And hopefully we'll have more star sessions with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. Have a nice evening.
Have a nice evening. Bye.